running to Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's Breaking History, where we will be breaking down global developments from the standpoint of historical currents, and especially today, where we are one day after the long-awaited debate, which I know was covered on Badlands yesterday. I'm gonna say a word or two, can't avoid that, but we definitely have an anniversary. 9/11 occurred some years ago on this very day, and so we're gonna have also a little bit of a voyage into the past to see and analyze things that I think a lot of people watching probably have come to terms with. The fact that we were lied to about some guy in a cave, conspiring to manage this massive, transformative attack on American soil that completely justified a new Five Eyes surveillance state, dragnet, forever wars. Obviously, there's something more lurking about outside the official narrative. We're going to unpack a little bit of that, and then we're going to go into some current events, especially in the Middle East developments, Latin America, some other stuff. But first, before we do anything, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Goldco. So here we go. Goldco. The 2024 election is approaching, bringing the potential impact for our finances, with $6 trillion in taxes in play. It's a great time to consider buying gold. Gold prices have been soaring lately as more people turn to gold to safeguard their assets against the looming threat of a recession or a debt-induced currency crisis. Join the thousands of hardworking Americans who are taking proactive steps to safeguard their savings with Goldco. With over 10 years of experience, Goldco has established itself as a top player in the gold industry. Their buyback guarantee assures you that if your situation changes, they will repurchase your metals at the best price, providing you with peace of mind. Head over to thebadlandsgold.com today to claim your free gold and silver kit. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com and take control of your financial destiny. So with that, how are you doing, Gordon?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you today?
I'm okay. I'm all right.
Good.
Even busy trying to keep my mind following the chaotic patterns of global processes, and I think we're holding it down okay. But it's a challenge to navigate as always.
Yeah, well, I think today being the anniversary of 9/11, I think it does make a lot of sense to talk about that event, the historical significance, and really, the more I've been thinking about this, it really does connect everything that we have discussed since I joined. We're coming up, I think, on our 1-year anniversary. If I have to go check the exact date, but I'm pretty sure I joined this show after the September GART of last year. So it would have been late September, maybe early October. I think I want to say it was before October 7th, but I can't remember exactly. Yeah. So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. Everything that you and I have discussed, and even the stuff that you and Sean were discussing before, I think connects to the 9/11 event. It really is one of the most significant events of modern history for that reason. I think when you look at the corporate espionage that we discussed with the East India Company and how that transformed into state espionage, when you look at everything that we discussed with state espionage, Western intelligence agencies, the CIA in the 20th century, the subversive nature, the subversive infiltration of all the major religions, the Operation Gladio, the way that governments are infiltrated, the way societies are infiltrated, the way societies are destabilized, overthrown, destroyed, rinse and repeat, forever wars, unipolar hegemony, all of that stuff that we've broken down in individual episodes over the past 11, 12 months, I think converge at the 9/11 event. And I, working in architecture and construction, which is what my professional background is, I've become even more disgusted, I think, when I look at the 9/11 false flag, like understanding the way buildings are constructed and materialism and how materials work. And just watching the video of the building literally disintegrate as it's falling to the ground, and just understanding that that's not how physics works. That's not how, even if you were to accept the premise that the planes somehow melted the steel and caused the buildings to collapse, they wouldn't collapse like that. They would have fallen over. They would have done something very different than just disintegrate into a pile of dust, in their own footprint. And we don't need to get into like the whole, like all those theories, because that, you know, that would be hours and hours and hours of discussion. And there are people out there who have done that analysis far more than we could right now. But, you know, just thinking about all that, I really do think it's an event that we need to recognize as a turning point in modern civilization in general, human history, and the response to it, which is still ongoing. I mean, 23 years later, the response is still happening. We're still responding to the event. And I think ultimately our generation, will be judged. Everyone alive right now will be judged by future generations based on how we respond, not just to that event, but to what that event represents.
Yeah, very well said. Now, it really did become part of our national myth. And unfortunately, the myth that was created, it's almost like a sacred story. It's more than a fact, right? That becomes ingrained into the control mechanisms of society as a whole. The cave masters who would wish to manipulate the shadows cast upon the cave wall, utilizing Plato's allegory of the cave, which I think is such a brilliant metaphor for exposing oligarchical techniques and operations that really gives us a pathway in terms of breaking out of said cave at any given phase of human civilization. Because this technique will always be true, right? The mind will always have a tendency of believing in the illusion of sensory reality, the five senses we were born with as a baby in the package. And it's great that we have these five senses to map out and to navigate the universe, but you can't presume that anything causal, which is intrinsically immaterial, because intentions, principles, you know, gravity, you can see the effects of an intention or the effects of a principle, but you can't see a principle itself. You can't see or smell justice or see or smell a bad intention. You can get the effects of the words of a liar, and you could see how they don't correspond with the actions. And then your mind can hold on to that paradox that there's a discrepancy, right, between the liar's actions and their words. And then your mind can develop an understanding that you're being lied to, and that there's a higher reality above what your senses are telling you that you can act upon, for good or for bad. And the allegory of the cave, I mean, Plato is teaching people, and I love that you just brought that up there. People could both read the Wikipedia entry and also in book 7 of the Plato's Republic. Yeah, it's that book 7. The whole thing is worth reading. It's full of dense paradoxes to get your mind to confront where our logical assumptions about reality breaks down when you test it out in reality. So logical theory versus practice, where do they break when pressed upon each other? Those are the paradoxes. That's better than gold. That's where you never want to run away from a cognitive dissonance, aka paradox. You want to hold on to it and struggle with it until you can resolve the cognitive dissonance. And that's the thing with 9/11. And that's a brilliant example right there that I don't know which cartoonist did that, where Plato's exposing how the oligarchy is able to utilize a false light through the form of fire. And he gives the example of people trapped as a chain, living their entire lives looking at a cave wall, with initiated priests or shadow masters who are assigned to make sounds, use puppets to cast from the fire shadows, and the people, the majority of people who are chained only know how to label the different sounds and images with names, and they'll build their whole identity around the shadow. And he gives this example of one or two people, well, one person specifically, who by some means gets out of their shackles, finds themselves moving through a little tunnel and out of the cave. He doesn't say how that happens. He leaves it up for the reader to figure that out on their own. But he's like, imagine that. And then this person starts seeing reality as it is. And at first, their eyes, he gives the example, are in pain, because you've been living in a dark cave your whole life for years. Your eyes, when they confront sunlight, are in pain. And, this is a metaphor for the mind encountering a higher realm, a higher quality of thinking. At first, it's difficult. Right? You're not used to swimming in that way. And you want to go back in the cave. And he describes this. And he says, but the real philosopher who loves the truth more than their comfort will stay out and will try to adjust their eyes to the higher light of the sun and appreciate grass as it is and things. And then he says, and this is what the oligarchy despises, he says, the real philosopher, if you truly want to be a lover of wisdom, which is what philosophia means, lover of wisdom, will go back into the cave to help other cave dwellers to discover that they were living in illusion, even if it means that they will be killed. And Plato says this. Now, the Neoplatonic school of the oligarchs that came after Plato, including pretty much a lot of those figures who do so much evil today, as the occult, witchcraft, priesthood managing the Theosophists and the Ruskinites and the Round Table, they're Neoplatonists, but they don't like that part. They like the idea of the elite recognizing a higher reality and then being the ones to control the shadows. Yep. So this is what 9/11 is to me. It was like the biggest cognitive dissonance for people to encounter a new sacred story, the amount of emotion that we were trained to associate with that, and the amount of hate of Islam and all of these things that we then started giving our acquiescence to freedom fries. We're like, yeah, because France doesn't want to, Jacques Chirac doesn't want to support us in our bombing of Iraq. And so we're not going to call them French fries anymore to be real patriots. We're going to call them freedom fries. And people went along with this insanity.
Yeah, I remember that. I was in high school and I remember that. Like looking back on it, I was like, that was one of the more retarded things that America has participated in. And yeah, I mean, so to give everyone just some context to what Matt just explained, because I think he explained it really well. The Republic, or just Republic, I think is the name of it, is a book that was written by Plato, who was the student of Socrates, in around the year 375 BC. So this would have been before the Roman Empire. This would have been before Alexander the Great. This was when Greece was still kind of the preeminent civilization, like the cradle of Western civilization was still forming. And these ideas about what a society should be, Greece was still a democracy. And so in Greece, you would have these city-states, the polis, the city-state, where democracy worked, where every single issue that basically came up, the people who were allowed to vote, which were, the patriarchs of every family would convene, and they would vote on every single issue. You'd vote on every single thing that the city-state was going to do, and that was democracy. That's literally what democracy is. And once you go into a representative government, you become a republic. So Plato wrote a book called The Republic. And he was smart enough to understand that if you're going to have a representative democracy, you're also going to have people who are going to want to subvert that system and use it to control society. And so he uses this really brilliant allegory to explain how that works. And you got to consider the fact that they didn't really have they did have sophisticated technology, but they didn't have anything close to what we have now in terms of mass media and entertainment. So he uses a really, really interesting metaphor to explain it. And, this is probably a better illustration that helped people understand it. But the real crux of how it's explained in Republic is this one, where you have, because they explain the diffuse sunlight, the ascent to sunlight. So you have sunlight coming into the cave. The people can see the sunlight. They understand that it's the sunlight. But then you have, I'll go back because I think it's easier to talk about it from this original one, from the Wikipedia page. Mm-hmm. So you have these shadows on the wall. That's basically like the things that we see on our television, the things that are presented to us in the media, as like the reality as it's presented to us directly at surface level. That's the shadow on the wall. You then have, so the politicians, the celebrities, the stupid social media trends, the hashtags, all that stuff. That's the shadows on the wall. Then you have the actual figurines that are projecting the shadows. Those are like what we would probably call the deep state, like the surface level deep state, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas, those people. Then you have these people who are controlling those figures. Those would be probably the higher levels, like George Soros, the people whose names we actually still know, but we don't really know enough about them as much as we probably would like to. And then they're serving, but these people are at the end of the day still serving a higher power. And that would be the people who are outside of the cave, who are actually living life in the real world as the ruling oligarchy. And those are probably the people I would assume in the real world whose names we don't even know, who have completely removed themselves from the written record and basically just control everything from behind the curtain. And like Matt said, the most noble thing you can do, as Plato describes it, is to, once you've escaped, if you go back and you look at this illustration, you can kind of understand, or even this one right here, you can kind of understand how difficult it is to get out of the cave. and like all the trial and tribulation you have to go. And while you're going out, all the people who are still trapped down here are pulling you back in and saying, where are you going? What are you thinking? Like, you can't leave that. You can't leave here. Like, you have to stay here with us. And then once you get out and you understand what the real world is, you then go back in to pull out the people that you care about.
Yeah.
And that is basically what we're doing right now. That's what the awakening is.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. And that's what we're all like in this voyage of life. I think just trying to figure out how to know the most we can know with the most morality it's associated with what we can know, hence wisdom. I think that's the thing. It's not because the oligarchy has knowledge of things that give them power, right, to do things. Now that kind of knowledge is it involves rigor, intellectual rigor. It involves a certain type of pursuit of the unknown, but it completely lacks this human condition, which again is very, very strongly felt throughout Plato's dialogues, which is the love of humanity, the love of truth, this question of conscience. So do we allow conscience to play a role in guiding our logical mind in its pursuit of the unknown, with the idea, like, for example, there's this thing called the Gorgias dialogue that Plato had also written around this time, a little bit earlier. And as you pointed out, this is 370 BC or 376 BC-ish, 50 years before Alexander the Great did his thing. But Plato is engaged in organizing philosopher kings. So that's part of what he's doing is not just theoretically trying to think like, wouldn't it be nice if we had moral rulers whose identities were tied to the love of truth and the love of their fellow man? Wouldn't that be nice? Or inversely, in the case of the Republic, if somebody reads it just as a literal text without appreciating any of the ironies or paradoxes that Plato is constantly getting you into, the philosopher king might seem like a horrible, like, fascist who wants to do eugenics, kill babies who are born into gold soul families. But let's say the baby was a bronze soul born into a gold soul family. What do? Well, you should throw it over the cliff and kill it, obviously. And so from a literalist's reading, that's horrific. Now, what I would say, when you look at that that work within the context of, number one, Plato's Academy, because all of his dialogues were training manuals for the people who would come and apply to be a part of his academy. His academy was generating some of the most anti-oligarchical statesmen, leaders, generals of the world who would advise King Dionysius of Syracuse and Dionysius II, who would lead the march of the 10,000 into Persia with Cyrus the Younger as the claimant to the throne of Persia. That was led and advised by Xenophon, who was a key ally of Plato from the academy, who then led, after all the generals were murdered, after Cyrus the Great, who was actually the claimant, the younger brother of, I think, Darius, was killed. And they were like, shit, we just made our way all the way deep into Persia, the heart of the one world government, global pagan priesthood, which was like the thing that replaced, or that became the martial lord for Babylon. When Cyrus the Elder, the first Cyrus the Great, paid homage to the temple of Marduk, the proto temple of Apollo, the satanic temple of Lucifer. Apollo is a solar deity, right? The fallen solar deity. That's the same concept of what Lucifer also represented. That's what Marduk was. That's what Cyrus the Great paid homage to and sacrificed to after he took over Babylon, was the Babylonian priesthood of Marduk. And then, Persia became the martial, kind of like the way I see Persia is the same way that I look at the United States after the murder of especially JFK, which became increasingly the martial lord for the British Empire, for its historic nemesis, which was the Hellfire Club command center of oligarchism, that then started backstabbing their allies that were formerly, like Russia was for 200 years, a historic ally of the United States. And then all of a sudden, the Cold War is launched and all of those historic traditions are sabotaged as the US becomes an empire within overthrowing Egypt, then getting enmeshed into wars in Korea, then Vietnam. What do you got there? That's Etemanunki. Who's this with this?
Yeah, so this is the ziggurat of Babylon, which a lot of scholars, like as it says right here, a lot of scholars believe that this is the inspiration for the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. So the Tower of Babel, which, people listening to this who are Christian, who understand that story, what Matt just described, the Temple of Marduk, a lot of scholars believe that's what was being referenced in the Bible when they said the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
So, and that's what he's describing, is he's describing this idea of a temple to basically to Satan, to all the concepts and ideas of what Satan represents on earth. You know, this kingdom, this divine heavenly kingdom, but on earth, here on earth, a secular kingdom, governed by men, created by men, where men are gods and not, instead of God being God, and basically a celebration of themselves, so to speak. So that, I think it's interesting because it all connects. Like, we're talking about these names that you may not be, like Marduk, that you may not be familiar with, but most people have certainly heard of the Tower of Babel. Most people have heard of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar would be like another name from that story. Hammurabi's code, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, like, you know, that kind of stuff. So just wanted to present that connections. I think it helps people when they can connect ideas.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think I'd watched a documentary a while ago. I wish I could find it again. Yeah, I could. On the Art Deco movement and things like the Empire State Building in the 1920s, which again was based on an idea of reviving the Babylonian aesthetic. So a lot of those art, especially when you look at when you just showed that one example, that one display of the basic architecture of the Babylonian like temples, these massive palatial temples, it really does reflect the Art Deco aesthetic and specifically the Empire State Building. So the idea that they decided to make this thing the biggest building of the time for a period, and to call it the Empire State Building, which, by the way, today is owned by the the Moon cult of the heirs of Sum Young Moon, who was himself an MK Ultra operative who created his own pseudo-Christian synthetic cult back in the 1950s and 60s, the Moonies. That's owned by Moon. So I think there was the idea of transforming the USA into an empire, because the US is founded on an anti-imperial tradition of pro-sovereign nation state, right? Like, the idea of America is don't go out chasing for monsters to destroy, don't get enmeshed in imperial wars abroad, like, stay focused on cleaning up your own act, making life good for the people living there, and develop the ideals that were put forth by people like Cicero, who was trying to keep Rome from becoming an empire. Like, Cicero was sort of the last Platonist. When he was asked, like, what are you? Are you a Stoic or are you an Epicurean? Cicero was like, I write in Platonic dialogues. I'm a Platonist. I'm neither one of those things. and they killed Cicero just the same way that Athens murdered Socrates, right? Like, a few hundred years earlier, Socrates didn't die by natural means. He was murdered by the Democratic Party of Athens, the heirs of Pericles, that had transformed Athens increasingly from this noble republican ideal of Solon, right? Who had lived about a century earlier, and Socrates was from the family of Solon directly. He had studied in a certain temple of Ammon in Egypt, and he came back with certain insights from a certain humanist temple that was in battle with the occult takeover of Egypt. And Solon had gotten Athens out of the long, centuries-long Dark Age. And this is also what Plato talks about in the Republic. In the opening pages of the Republic, he talks about the story of Solon going to the Egyptians at the temple of Ammon and getting advice on, what do I do? Athens has 90% of the population in slavery, debt slavery. That was the thing. That's, there was total ignorance. And the Egyptians, the Egyptians of the temple of Ammon were chastising Solon, saying, you Greeks are like young children. You don't even know your past. You don't realize how great you once were, and that when we were in a crisis in Egypt, when the peoples from the sea were threatening to create a world empire and enslave everybody, it was the Greeks who organized to save and liberate North Africa. And now you've forgotten your own past. You don't have any records of your past. You're like children. And
that would have been about what, 3000 BC?
It's speculative, but I think so.
Yeah, I assume so. So we're talking about 3000 years before, maybe 2000 years before Plato.
It might, well, it might have been, maybe what they were referencing could have been, there was a cataclysm in around the 1100 or 1000.
True.
I think it's 1052 or something BC. There was some weird cataclysm across the world that I think probably coincided with the melting of the glaciers. You know, where we were in an ice age. We're like currently today, we're living in the Holocene warming period, right? So for the past 11, 12,000 years, it's been the Holocene warming. And if you look back for the past 2 million years, 90+% of that time, for the past 2 million years, it's been an ice age. We've been mostly under ice for most of the world's surface area. And it was about 12 to 11,000 years ago that, so the way it works, and there's a movie called The Great Global Warming Swindle, which introduced this to me. It was done by BBC of all places back in 2007. They can't do this sort of thing anymore, but they introduced this wonderful graph that has been verified that showcases that the norm has been for 80 to 90,000 years, you have ice ages. And then every 80 to 90,000 years, you have like a little warming blip due to certain astrophysical properties of the Earth's relationship to the solar system and the solar system's relationship to the galaxy. There's things we have yet to discover, right? Like we're scratching the surface, but this is what happens. And then for about 8 to 12,000 years, you have these little warming blips where the ice recedes, right? The water levels rise accordingly. And then the norm happens again, and we fall back into the norm of the ice age, which is the ice, the liquid water turns back into solid. The ice grows down into like, you know, the Midwest of the United States. And at those points of ice ages, you know, the water levels of the oceans drip down about 400 to 800 feet. So a lot of the coastal, since most societies for most of history didn't have rail development, you know, the idea of building civilization inland was very difficult. Most civilizations developed around the coasts of waters, and most knowledge would have been generated by maritime astronavigation, trying to figure out the cycles of the stars, figuring out the harmony of what appears to be chaotic stars in the night sky. At a certain point, the mind can wrap itself around anomalies, like, for example, you know, we were talking about paradoxes, right? Like, where if we assume everything's chaos, then why is there certain repetitive rhythms? Why are certain things standing out? Like Mars is red, everything else is white stars. Mars is a red star. How does that behave differently from the average fixed stars when you look at it every night? Come back at the same hour every night and observe the behavior of Mars or the wanderers, right? What we later on discovered were planets. When compared to the average fixed stars that all move in a certain direction, the planets move in another direction. It's the second motion. So the mind discovers these properties like the precession of the equinox, and we can then translate those ideas of the heavens as far as the law organizing the heavens and the creator of the heavens to shaping our decision on what do we do here as humans on the earth. You know, how do we make the most beautiful architecture? So in Greece, as well as in Egypt, you have the golden section, which is something that you could discover as a property within astronomy. You see it within the calculations of the distances between certain planets, and the building up of the pyramid of the Great Pyramid of Giza. We see it within the architecture of the Parthenon of Greece. So they were utilizing these proportions that were aesthetically beautiful, but that were also intellectually sound based on like the laws of nature. And this is what Plato, what do you got there? This is like some underwater.
Yeah. Just to kind of provide some context for what you're describing. Here, this is like something that's been discovered underwater. It's called the Yonaguni Monument. I'll give you a sense of where it is. This isn't a great map in terms of resolution, but it kind of gives you a sense. So it's kind of like in between Japan, and it's off of Taiwan, kind of in the direction of Japan, but it's way out here in the middle of the ocean, way out here in the China Sea, right? And it's very obvious from exploring it that this used to be a city. I mean, when you look at this architecture, there is obviously architecture happening here deep under the ocean.
Yes.
That is very, very old. I mean, here's like a map of the scuba divers who've gone down there have drawn of what it looks like and what they filmed. This is like a very, very large city that's completely very deep underwater now. And they're like, how the hell did this happen? Like, how did this get here, and how did this happen? And it probably is related to what you're describing. This is probably some sort of ancient civilization that is from before recorded history, that's now completely underwater.
Absolutely, dude. No, 100%. That's amazing. And yeah, you could just see the geometry, the proportions, the symmetry of these rocks. This doesn't just happen naturally.
Yep,
Um
of
and
course.
indeed, like, like Plato is getting at in the Critias dialogue, which was like we've lost a big chunk of the Critias, which is part of the trilogy of which the Republic is a part of. He talks about Atlantis. I think that's the most
Yep.
earliest reference to Atlantis
Hmm.
that we know of as a place that was likely around the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yep. Which
Um,
I'll show everyone where that is. But yeah, keep going.
And it's speculative. I mean, it might be in other locations, but that seems to be based on the description that he's giving. And up until that moment as well, like very recently, people thought that places like Troy, that was discussed in detail by Homer, was also fictional. And then it was discovered by a certain German scientist who was actually just saying, well, how about we just read Homer's writings and the descriptions within the Odyssey and the Iliad and see if we can just follow what he's saying to locate a city called Troy. And he did that and it worked and they found Troy. So it wasn't fictional after all.
Yep.
And it
Troy
was around the Black Sea.
and Troy was over here. Where exactly? I believe it's on the west coast of Turkey, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, it is, and it's a big chunk of it, I believe. It extended to an area which is also underwater. Like they found structures under the entry point towards into the Black Sea that, for some reason, UNESCO, which has a sort of monopoly over a lot of these ancient sites. UNESCO is, by the way, created by Julian Huxley, the eugenicist, at the same time as he was creating the World Wildlife Fund, the Conservation Fund for the United Nations, which was the sort of parent. It was the repackaged eugenics based on the idea that we have to save nature from humans. So he did that at the same time as he was creating UNESCO. And in the founding document for UNESCO, which then laid claim to all of the ancient heritage sites of the world and then controlled initiated scientists who would then be the only ones to get access over information pertaining to who gets to research new finds in Egypt or in the waters of Greece. Because even now it's very difficult to get a license as a scientist to go in, or an archaeologist to go and explore the waters in the Mediterranean even. Why is it so difficult? Where is this pressure coming from? And that's an open question I'm just leaving out there. But right there, what you have is the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yep.
The
And so it's speculated based on like the descriptions that are given in these ancient texts that are written by like these ancient historians that it's either somewhere around here or maybe an island. Like people have thought maybe it's the Canary Islands that are out here, maybe the Azores. So it's either an island that's maybe out here where Atlantis was, or I mean, in the description of what happened to Atlantis, basically it sounds like either a nuclear weapon, something of that scale, or a volcano. A very bright light in the middle of the night explodes, and then the whole island, as it's described, sinks into the ocean. And so they're saying it's probably somewhere in this region. That's probably where they think Atlantis would have existed, and it certainly seems like it was a real place, based on all the different people who talked about it.
Yeah, and increasingly, I hosted recently a lecture by a geologist who is somebody who is a promoter of a certain model of geological growth, which is he's anti-Lyell. So there's this guy named Sir Charles Lyell, who's sort of the father of modern geology, standard model geology. That's the heart of the idea of the gradualist motion of tectonic plates around the Earth. And there's obviously like a certain element of truth in the fact that there do seem to be an element of like the tectonic plates has a touch of truth, but it seems like Lyell, representing the British empirical, which is the science based upon sense perception school of analysis that became hegemonic in Western science, was intentionally trying to subvert any approach to appreciate the cataclysmic but yet quantizable aspects of the changes in the Earth's past. So we don't find that things, just like in nature, we don't find that the Darwinian explanation for biological life is satisfactory in any way. There's no evidence of gradual changes of one species slowly developing a claw, slowly changing into a new species. None of that. But that's all stuff you have to assume is happening if you approach things from the Darwinian filter. and also chaos too, randomness. Darwin also demands that you assume that random mutations are the driving force. So no reason, no purpose, no beauty, nothing of like that is permitted within the framework of somebody who is choosing to adopt or understand life and its evolution from a Darwinian standpoint. No intelligent design, none of that. No, and in fact, in life, what you see in fossil records, since 99% of the life that's ever existed doesn't exist, when you look at the actual fossil records, we don't, not only do we not see gradualism, but we see, number one, directionality implying purposefulness. So like there's an orientation towards increased complexity, increased abilities to express higher emotions as life develops, but also punctuated moments. So we don't see like individual species coming and going. We see whole systems disappearing, interconnected, harmonious systems of the Jurassic period or Triassic disappearing with certain abrasive cuts, probably expressed by a mixture of perhaps asteroids, increased volcanism, floods, as the Plato says in the Republic, when he's, you know, you hear the priesthood of Ammon talking to Solon, they're like, look, you Greeks don't realize that at different times we've had destructive things from the sky that resulted in only people who were low ground surviving. At different times you had destructive waters resulting in only people who were living in the mountain regions surviving. So he's describing the floods, the asteroids that periodically strike, that the Greeks had forgotten how to think about those things, which they're probably all kind of happening at different moments due to not because God just is just pissed necessarily. It's because probably there is discoverable principles like that. It's not like the dinosaurs were so sinful, the dinosaurs, that God was so pissed that he had to kill the dinosaurs. It's like, no, there's certain things that the dinosaurs couldn't discover with their little walnut-sized brains pertaining to the cyclical destructions of asteroids that you know, maybe our solar system, which is generally harmonic, right? The planets, the asteroid belt of Ceres, there's generally a harmonious order most of the time. But something happens every now and again, periodically, where things get a little out of whack for a period, resulting in asteroids going astray from they leave their orbit. There's millions of asteroids in the orbit of Ceres between Mars and Jupiter. Millions. We don't know if it's an unformed planet. We don't know if it's a planet that once was a planet that exploded. We don't know. We have yet to discover, but we know that they're there. Just like the Kuiper objects around which, you know, Pluto was once considered to be a planet. That's another asteroid belt. Millions of these things. We don't know if it was once a planet, but we know that sometimes they get out of whack. Our solar system goes through a dissonance and things get very destructive and hostile to life. But outside of this periodic destruction, there's a higher function of qualitative improvement, and new systems come online that express attributes that were unexistent in the previous system. Like, you know, these little like mammals in the time of dinosaurs were not driving property. Like, they weren't playing a big role. Little squirrels and things, you know, they weren't playing a huge role in the Jurassic period. However, when the big things died off, the little mammals we discovered were actually much more capable of thriving, surviving, expressing higher emotions, and providing a platform for further development. But it's all based upon the idea that God created the universe in a reasonable, harmonious way, which is getting better. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. And again, it's all located in Plato's writings. And again, I mentioned the Gorgias dialogue. People could read it. It's on how to live a good life. If you've discovered this higher idea, how do you live according to that ideal of somebody who pursues truth in a world where most people still believe to different degrees in illusions? Whether it's about JFK, the murders of great American presidents like Lincoln, or things like 9/11 or Vietnam, which was involving as well a big lie about, you know, the U.S. being attacked by the Viet Cong commies, which never happened. And so we went into and gave our acquiescence to getting enmeshed into a 10-year wasting war in Vietnam. That was never winnable. And what do you got there? That's a
yeah. So I don't know if we've ever talked about this on the show. I'm pretty sure we have, but maybe we've mentioned it. But so this is like a 47-page document from the CIA vault that reveals that the U.S. government knows for a fact they found Noah's Ark many, many years ago, decades ago. I think in the 70s, they found Noah's Ark in southeastern Turkey, um, at Mount Ararat, and it would have been far, far eastern Turkey, right near Armenia. And so I'll show you where that is. But basically, I mean, they have diagrams of it, they have pictures of it. Now, if you go to like Google or Yandex or any of these search engines and you try to search for it, you get these images, which are all fake. These are all like fake images where they're trying to show you this weird mountain that's, oh, look, it's kind of shaped like a boat. False. This is not what they found. They found an actual boat that's on the side of Mount Ararat. And then if you go to Mount Ararat, there's actually villages very close by that are all named in the biblical story, that have adopted names from like Noah, like from the story of Noah. So it all connects. Like it all makes sense that this is actually where Noah's Ark is. Just goes to show that the flood story is real, and that the government knows for a fact that Noah's Ark is real, and they found it. And then there's a bunch of like misinformation out there about where it is. I think this might be actually where it is. The Ararat, Ararat. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said Ararat, but yeah. So just goes to show that like this flood stuff, like these ideas of these major cataclysms occurring, is real. The biblical account of it from Noah is real. And then there's a lot of cover up and the government trying to make us believe that it didn't actually happen, but it most certainly did. And they know for a fact, by the way, that Noah's Ark is real and it exists, and you can go see it. You can look at it on Google Earth. I'm trying to find it. I found it before. I'll just show you my other screen. It's somewhere in the Caldera region. So I want to say it's somewhere. I'm not going to sit here and make everyone watch me try to find it, but I found it before. so you can go, I mean, if you go do some research, you can go find it and actually just go look at it, and it's right there. And it's very obvious that it is a man-made structure, and it's embedded in the side of the mountain. But yeah, and it just kind of just goes to show you how nefarious our government is and how much they're lying to us. Because if that was made public, it would validate the history of the Bible. It would validate what's written in the Bible, and it would change modern human history. It would change the way we view the world now, and there'd be a lot of like disputes that I think would just be resolved. And so yeah, I mean, you have some pretty evil people who are trying to cover this up. I mean, if we go back real quick, I had pulled up a few things. So here's the ziggurat that a Tower of Babel that we had talked about before, like in the context of the city in Babylon. You can see how like the influence on European architecture that it would have had. I mean, these look like castle, I think palisades is what they're called. The way that they construct castles in medieval Europe thousands of years later. You then have the relationship between the ziggurat and the pyramids. So pyramids are really just ziggurats that are with many, many more tiers that then have limestone laid over top of them to smooth out those steps. You also have the South American ziggurat, which I have pulled up right here. And so like on the other side of the world, you have a very similar structure. Now, this doesn't necessarily definitively mean that the two civilizations were in contact, but it is interesting that they both built similar style structures. Although when you're building structures and you want to make them stepped, how many different ways can you do that? So yeah. It just goes to show that this stuff is kind of all connected. You can see the influence that this had on Roman architecture, because this in Babylon came from Iran. And eventually those people then left the Middle East and went to Italy, Venice, northern Italy, Rome, founded Rome. So these people were moving around, and you can see their influence everywhere. And then eventually when things became hostile for them in Venice, they left Venice and went to London.
Yeah.
And so it's like this stuff, the history there is so simple once you really start to wrap your head around it. I mean, there's a lot of complexity and nuance, of course, and then there's a lot of misinformation. But ultimately, and then I'll pass it back to you. But going back to Socrates, what Plato witnessed with his own eyes was the greatest person he ever knew, Socrates, who was widely respected, widely loved, the wisest person, arguably of all time, who, outside of Jesus, who was persecuted by his government, and what he was ultimately trying. And remember, Socrates believed in physical health. So, this idea that he was like this meek little philosopher is wrong. He was actually in great physical shape. When he was 48 years old, he went and served on the front lines in a war as part of the phalanx. Everyone's seen 300. They understand what the phalanx is. And there's actually 3 separate accounts that are given by other people who witnessed him in a battle break ranks, run forward by himself, and at the age of like 48, 50, save 3 important people on separate occasions and drag them back into the phalanx as a 50-year-old man. So he was like a pretty incredible, like, heroic person. All of that is basically covered up and not really talked about or taught. But basically, he was teaching all the young people. He was a teacher. So he was teaching all the young people like how to think and how to be like great thinkers. And the government said, you know what, you're poisoning the youth. And they gave him multiple opportunities to just renounce his teachings and say, I was wrong about everything. Like, don't listen to me. I'm a crackpot. And he said, no, I can't do that. And they said, this is your last chance or we're going to kill you. And he said, no. He said, kill me. And so they executed him. And by the way, that's exactly what happened to Jesus hundreds of years later, where the government in Judea, in Rome, said, hey, if you just like say you're not the Messiah, like, just say everything that all the teachings that you've given out, just renounce it all and we won't kill you. And he's like, no, I can't do that. And so they killed him. So it's amazing. Like, it's always been interesting to me that those 2 people who were very selfless and very great in their own rights met the same fate. Met the exact same fate at the hands of a secular government. And that's why I get really, really irritated when people tell me that I'm not allowed to criticize a secular government, meaning the state of Israel. I get like apoplectic when people tell me that, because I think it is one of the psyop involved in that, where you're not allowed to simply question something because of what it may potentially be connected to. And this is where we're going to start to get back to 9/11. Is disgusting to me. It is counterintuitive to everything that I believe in my soul, that nothing on this earth, nothing in this material realm is beyond reproach. Nothing should not be questioned, including systems and institutions that are created by human beings and administered by human beings. All of those things are deeply flawed because they're inherently flawed because they're made by human beings. And the idea that we're not allowed to criticize that or question it is insane. And it is a system of slavery. It's a system of oppression. It's a system of mental anguish and abuse. And it has been conditioned into us and like brainwashed into us. I mean, Americans are deeply brainwashed to believe that we're allowed to question the American government all day long, but we cannot question the government of Israel, or your life will be destroyed. And that is absolutely demonstrable. I mean, just look what happened to Kanye West. So, I mean, when we get we'll get back to 9/11 here in a minute, but those are the things that I've been thinking about. And it's the more I'm told that I need to stop and I need to back up and I need to revisit I need to read the Bible and I need to understand the Bible, the more I want to talk about it more, because what's written in the Bible is that everything should be questioned here on earth, that nothing on this earth is sacred in terms of being like a heavenly kingdom or divine, and that nothing is even approaching perfection or approaching infallibility. And to suggest otherwise is a form of idolatry. It's a form of blasphemy. And it is really a betrayal of everything that Jesus taught.
It's a real tragedy, I find, that when you look at the geopolitical history of the world, and specifically like the rise of the Jews in the context of said reality, and I've been doing a lot of work on this because of my recent fixation on understanding the occult agencies from like ancient Babylon and how they maintained their power structure over the next 3,000 years. Sometimes under Christian garb, sometimes under Jewish garb, sometimes under Muslim garb, often under all three. But, it's the same nefarious, child sacrificing Babylonian priesthood with its esoteric inner teaching structure and its outer exoteric belief structure for the masses, the plebes, who would believe in the shadows, right, cast by the priesthood. It's the same thing. And the thing that really gets me is that when you look at the rise of Judaism from the Old Testament books and the prophets, it pissed off the oligarchy so much that these prophets emerged. Jeremiah and you look at the books of Kings and Chronicles, and I've been revisiting a lot of these things, and you look for the amount of times that the Old Testament prophets were calling out the cult of Marduk, not Marduk, sorry, Moloch, the current, Baal, a variety of these like pagan deities that demanded immense human sacrifice, mostly firstborn children. That was the norm of the world that people like Moses were born into. It was like that was the dominant thing.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing for like the Wotan Viking. You look at like if you look at the actual behavior of these pagan Nordic myths of the Viking gods, it's not that different. The way that they would carry out their rituals to satisfy the demands of the gods as far as humans was often killing your firstborn children, and people would bring their families to like Sunday service, whereby within the Sunday service 5 to 12 children would end up getting sacrificed in front of everybody's eyes through the gods. And we saw that also with the Aztecs at different years of drought. Last report I read was something like 80,000 to 90,000 humans were sacrificed in 1 year in Aztec Mexico to satisfy the gods during so you've got similar.
Yeah, and that I believe was right before it collapsed, because they were worried there's something. Speaking of cataclysms, that's how it all ended, is that some sort of cataclysm happened and just wiped them out right before the Europeans showed up, and that's why they succumbed to the Europeans so quickly. But I don't want to go on that tangent.
Yeah, let's not go on that tangent for now. That's a whole can of worms. But that being said, there was something that pissed off the oligarchy, the pagan priesthood, that was pissed off that these Jews were not just demanding an end to child sacrifice and calling out the fallacy of these different like bloodletting gods, which are still today worshipped by the elite. But through things like the fact that the elite, I've just discovered this recently and doing ironically a bit of work on Jack the Ripper, that people like Charles Warren, who was the excavator of Solomon's Temple in the 1890s or 1860s to 70s. He became the police commissioner of the London Metropolitan Police, overseeing the Jack the Ripper murders, which there's a whole book I'm writing on this. It's going to be done in about a week. Charles Warren believed in his own writings that Solomon's Temple wasn't the Solomon of the Bible. It was a pagan demonologist who was interfacing with demons that built his temple. And that was the zone, like under the Dome of the Rock. They believed that the rock was where Abraham tried to carry out the sacrifice of his son that was stopped by the angel, which was, again, an intervention from the Jewish matrix against the idea of human sacrifice, saying that, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to leave that behind. We're going to now, if we're going to sacrifice something, it'll be an animal, but it won't be humans anymore. That was a political intervention on a mass human sacrifice norm that was practiced. And these people who want to revive Solomon's Temple today in the Middle East, their idea of it is Solomon, Sol Amon, the man god emperor priest that they believe existed 1000 BC, who was able to use his pentagon ring to get Beelzebub and the Lord of the Flies to groom their hordes of demons to build Solomon's Temple, around which global pagan human sacrifices would occur, and through which the blood would run into the ground of the Holy Land, tying the people's souls to the land in some weird blood, this blood cult. What do you got there? The Zohar.
So
right?
this is where, like, everything that you just described is 100% accurate. Like, that's what the belief is. And it's important to understand that where this idea first came from was the Zohar. And I've talked about this before. I don't know if it was on this show or somewhere else, but it might have been when I did an interview with Alpha Warrior on his show. But the Zohar is where all of those ideas come from. And it was written in the year 1240 AD. So 800 years ago. And the claim is that, and this is like where the Kabbalah comes from. This is where like Kabbalah, like mysticism, like all that stuff. And it comes from, it's only 800 years old, although it references materials that are far more ancient than that, Solomon's temple. And so the idea that like Solomon, communicated with demons and the demons gave him power and magic in order to construct his temple, like that's where the idea comes from, is it's only 800 years old. This is not some ancient religion. It claims to be an ancient religion, but the actual codified ideas, like the codified theology, was only written down 800 years ago. So
I know.
Important context.
It's so important because it's all like n'importe quoi, as they say in French, like whatever. Like they just made shit up and then they called it ancient. And if it's the same thing for like the Testament of Solomon, if people go and Google the Testament of Solomon, read that. It's basically something that appears to have emerged in the medieval ages, as an occult proto-Rosicrucian text describing exactly, what I was going through and what the Zohar says about like Solomon, the demonologist, the necromancer, which they believe they can get power from if they like kill a bunch of cows that are of a certain species, which is again tied very much to the cult of Mithra, the cult that was an anti-Christian cult of Rome, a warrior cult that was celebrated by this character Mithra killing and sacrificing a bull to Helios, the soul Invexus, which people like Julian the Apostate, who was trying to rebuild Solomon's temple in 360 to 362, was calling himself. He's like, I'm the soul Invectus. And he was basically, he wasn't illegalizing Christianity, but what he was doing was trying to destroy Christianity by giving equal rights to all of the pagan human sacrificing cults, whether it's Isis Serapis or Cybele Attis or Mithra. He was giving like them all equal patronage and was really grooming the Jews as useful idiots to support the reconstruction of Solomon's temple in 360 as a way to say, oh, look, we will give you state sponsorship. We know that you felt wronged since Rome became a little bit more pro-Christian a few decades earlier. Let's actually reward you now. And they started grooming these like the Pharaoh's Jews, right? Like the court Yudin, to become the agencies, kind of like the proto Rothschilds of the oligarchy, who would then encourage a Jewish Christian revanchism. Like, you'll be instruments against the Christians now. So it won't be Rome attacking the Christians. It'll be the Jews attacking the Christians. It'll be the cult of Mithra attacking the Christians. And we'll give you a new Solomon's temple, just like you wanted. And it didn't work.
A total inversion, by the way, of the story of the crucifixion, where the Pharisees manipulated the Romans to kill Jesus so that the blood wasn't directly on their hands. But that's absolutely what happened. And that's exactly what Mel Gibson documented in The Passion of the Christ. And I think part of the reason why he was basically expelled from Hollywood for doing that, because he exposed that's exactly what happened, is the Pharisees manipulated Rome into doing it. And Rome was kind of like, we're pagans. Like, we don't care if this guy wants to call himself God. We have dozens of gods, countless gods. Yeah. So, yeah. But anyway, it's like that. It's such an important thing. In my understanding, and this might be inaccurate, but my understanding is that Constantine, when he, I think it was around 325, like around the Council of Nicaea. That was the Council of Nicaea. I think it was around that time that Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome. And I think part of the reason that he did it was because he found out that the Pharisees, who were still around, they had just been expelled. There's the diaspora, is that they basically came up with these new ideas, these re-emerging ideas, where they were trying to reinvent themselves and say, Jesus was the greatest heretic who ever lived. Jesus is burning in a pit of excrement in hell. And, these really, really awful just ideas, like occult ideas. And then Constantine found out about that and was like, okay, you know what? We're going to make it the state religion now so that everyone learns the teachings of Jesus, because they're very positive and they're very helpful to creating a beneficial society when people have morality and selflessness and charity and mercy and grace and forgiveness, which are things we've talked about in recent weeks on this show. And, if that's exactly what happened, I don't know, but I've read those interpretations and it seems to make sense. It certainly aligns with the idea that the Talmud was written around that time, like hundreds of years after Jesus was killed. And the Talmud was basically presented by the Pharisees as these are the oral traditions that we just never bothered to write down that go back way before Jesus. And we were always doing this stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
this is always,
it was such a cheat. It's such a
yeah,
cheat.
yeah. It's like we were always doing this stuff. We just never bothered to write any of it down.
Yeah.
And so it's like when you look at that, you're kind of like, well, wait a minute, like that's not that doesn't make any sense.
That's shifting the goalposts a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And then they're talking about like Jesus, burning in hell, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like that, like say what you want about Jesus, like say what you want about like religions, but Jesus was a pretty nice guy. I mean, I don't think he's burning in hell right now. So, it's important to understand that throughout history, there's just been cycles and cycles and cycles of people trying to improve society by creating a moral structure, a moral code, like Socrates and Plato were trying to do, and then oligarchy forming to try to consolidate power to oppress people. And that's exactly, like you just described, a really great story about how the Jews brought this this new dynamic to an existing system where they got rid of human sacrifice, right? And then eventually you see that system, that new exciting system, be corrupted and turn into a oligarchy, the Pharisees. And then Jesus comes along and stands up to the Pharisees and says, you're wrong. All of you are sitting here living in opulence. All of you are sitting here, complaining that Rome is oppressing all of you. But at the end of the day, you are all oligarchs and you're enjoying life while your people are suffering. And you could be bringing prosperity to your people, but you're not, because you're not prioritizing that. And because he was saying all of that, that's why the Pharisees were really, really upset with him, in addition to the fact that he claimed to be the Messiah. But it's just
Yeah.
it was a threat to their power. Once you threaten an oligarchy's power, they do things like blow up the World Trade Center. They do things like shoot the former president in the head. They do things like steal elections. They do things like false flags, overthrow governments, destroy civilizations. This is what they do, because when they feel their power being threatened, they react. And so nothing has changed since the beginning of time. It's just the balance between right and wrong, good and evil, moral people, and people who seek earthly, materialistic, what's the word? Not power or authority, but that's just one form of it. But I would say indulgence, like materialistic earthly indulgence, which comes in the form of, sex, wealth, power, authority, everything happening here and now in this plane, and not necessarily in the next life or the next plane.
Well, see, this is for me like one of the greatest deceits of the thing that became known as transhumanism, which is like sort of I think everyone watching this probably has an idea of transhumanism as a religion. It's a pseudoscientific, but it's not really scientific at all. It's pseudoscientific because it's just occultism, ancient occultism masquerading as science, kind of like the way Darwin is actually occultism masquerading as science. Or Sir Charles Lyell's geology is occultism masquerading as science. Because it's based on well, for the sake of transhumanism, it's the idea that immortality is something which only fools believe pertains to the soul, or this immaterial property that somehow imbues meaning that ties us to the creator. That's for the fools, for the ignorant masses. The wise elite, they know that immortality is something that is physically real, where you could conceptually have forever sex, experience forever hedonism in some form. And so you've had this, like, what's called the Philosopher's Stone of the Rosicrucians, right? As this elixir of life, this thing that would give us El Dorado, that would give the elites, the occult elite who initiates access to physical hedonism forever. Or in the case of like a lot of the Rosicrucians and proto-Rosicrucians that like were doing weird orgies in caves in like the Sibyl's cave of the Cumaean Sibyl, going back to ancient Athens, or the ancient Roman Apennine Sibyl, up above Nursia, the little coastal area, or a little area that's near the coasts of the Isle of Capri. These are like ancient occult networks that were really big hubs during the Middle Ages, when the Cathars were being persecuted, the Templars were being persecuted, and rightfully so, because they were carrying out sacrifices to Baphomet and carrying out weird Manichaean sex orgy rituals masquerading as some weird Gnostic pseudo-Christian ritual of the orgy and sacred sex, involving usually drugs, by the way. Usually there's like proto-opiates, heroin. Well, not heroin. It wasn't there, but opium, ergot, like, wheat blight on what do you call it? Yeah, wheat blight. So fungus that grows on wheat gives you hallucinogenic trip. Mushrooms, there's a variety of fungi that also do the job, and they're part of elite like Eleusinian mystery rituals to depattern and reconstruct the minds of initiates who go through this into a sex murder relationship where they start converging these moral opposites like death, murder, and sex creation into different sides of the same thing. So they integrate the darkness. They create schismed personality disorders within initiates, utilizing, again, sex, drugs, and trauma. Not that different from today's Tavistokian MK Ultra operations that were already being done, maybe with like less scientific control, but the same principle. And that what you just showed there is the Isle of Capri. That's an ancient Mithraic cult center off of the well, actually it's a little further down, but anyway, that's Rome over there. Naples is further down south. I guess you're going to what are you looking at?
I lost my spot. Where was but keep talking.
Further south was the island.
But you've mentioned before the Amalfi Coast and what the Amalfi Coast like what the Amalfi Coast
you're getting to it. There it is. There. Yeah, there's Amalfi, there's Capri on the left, and Capri is owned by Amalfi for a long time. Yeah, you've waged there with your wife, and had some some beautiful images, some beautiful pictures, and it's beautiful. Pompeii is a little bit, it's kind of close to that too. Pompeii is close to Naples, and that was like a cult center of ISIS before the volcano blew. But all that to say, like, this
huge tourist destination here. This is like a major tourist, and it's beautiful. And it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But there's something slimy under the surface too. And all that to say, it's like this is what the oligarchy was trying to do, is to create a new religion based upon getting the masses to become as enmeshed. And this goes back to the Republic at the beginning. Enmeshed in the belief and addiction to sensual experience. So your mind would become shackled to the perceptions of the five senses and the joys and pleasures of the flesh, that the oligarchy for themselves wanted to have this Rosicrucian invisible college religion, that somehow some physical astral being of your physical self would continue to exist as an imprint forever, whereby these for the initiates only for the initiates, only for the special Mormons, right? Only for the elect, the society of the elect. They would have an imprint of their physical hedonistic self on the astral plane to experience pleasure forever if they've gone through the process. But most cannot go through that process, they say. And so it becomes this weird gateway into hell that they walk into, whereby the oligarchy ends up pursuing, from my standpoint, and this is where, again, transhumanism, the rise of the Silicon Valley cult, especially in the 1970s, sponsored by Lawrence Rockefeller, becomes really a big problem. People like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, like all of these transhumanists who talk about the idea of like uploading our consciousness into a binary USB and then translating that into some like forever, some undying being that can cheat death, which Peter Thiel gave many speeches on his belief that we can like overcome death by physically, not through the soul or anything, but physically downloading our consciousness into a thing that then becomes, whether through clones or whether through cyborgs or whether through some synthetic creation from a lab. I don't know. It's not really thought through. The thing that allows elite humans to live forever. And they were doing this way back then too. And but again, it's all based on not doing good, not loving your fellow man. If anything, it's based upon a feeling of disgust for humanity, which is animating their creativity. Not a love, but a disgust. Whereas like Plato is trying to awaken a love by, even though humans act ugly and act stupid, he's like, no, they're victims of the cave. They've only known the shadows. You can't expect people who believe that the shadows are true to behave in a beautiful way. Of course they're going to behave ugly because they're not their true selves yet. They have to awaken to that. And that's where the true teacher versus the fake teacher of somebody who impresses persuasive arguments onto somebody. The true teacher is somebody who uses questions to awaken paradoxes and a desire, a thirst for knowledge in their students. That's different. So Plato's like trying to create that with Xenophon. He's doing that with Alexander. Like Alexander's advisors are after Alexander kicks out Aristotle, saying that Aristotle is trying to brainwash him. He brings in Plato's advisors from the academy to guide him in combating his father, Philip of Macedon, and then undoes this whole like Western Persian Empire model. Because, Persia was trying to create a Western, they saw that they were getting too big for their britches. Just like Rome was later on. Rome realized, okay, if we're gonna still exist, we got to divide up our empire into an Eastern and Western. One became Byzantine, one became, well, a shit show. But that's what Persia was trying to do with Philip of Macedon. He was supposed to create the Western Persian Empire. Alexander subverted that through the advice and guidance of people who went through Plato's curriculum, who were advising him. And unfortunately, he got murdered. By whom? Well, according to Alexander's generals, who carried out a trial on Aristotle's nephew, who is the one who was believed at the time to be the most likely to have poisoned Alexander. And out of that came, another decaying process, out of which people like Cicero were warning the Platonist Cicero, who was killed also in a similar way as Socrates and as Jesus later on, for trying to morally stand up to the slide into empire of Rome. He was trying to say, like, look, Rome, and Cicero describes this in his Commonwealth, a book that's his own republic later on. He says, like, look, Rome lost their moral mandate when they got enmeshed into the first of the 3 Punic Wars against Carthage, which was our ally for 200 years. Carthage and Rome were allies against the Persian Empire. And then we stabbed Carthage in the back. And then we started going into an imperial modality, and we brought in things like the cult of Cybele, the Eleusinian mysteries, the cult of Isis were brought into Rome. And, when Cicero started speaking like this and he didn't want to like kill Julius Caesar, and he's like, okay, if you're going to kill Julius Caesar, you better also, like, if you're going to do that, you shouldn't do that. But if you're going to do that, kill Mark Antony too. And Brutus and others, Cassius, were like, no. We can control Mark Antony. We'll just kill Julius, and that slid Rome into years and years of civil war. Mark Antony then killed Cicero. Mark Antony tried to declare the center of the new pagan empire in Alexandria with Cleopatra. That didn't work, but that was a battle between 2 cult centers. It's like, okay, we're going to have a new one world global pagan mystery religion cult government to replace the Persian Empire. Is the capital going to be in Rome, or is it going to be in Alexandria? Go fight. So it was a fake fight. And on the one hand, you had Caesar Augustus, who was like, no, we want it to be in Rome. And he won. He ended up doing the deal with the cult of Mithra on the Isle of Capri. And he ended up getting, and this is according to a lot of really great researchers have gone through this, including Lyndon LaRouche, who I've just been blown away by on this research. But yeah, it was like the cult of Mithra, which was then brought into becoming the primary cult for the Legion, for the Praetorian Guard, for like alongside Isis and Serapis. They did a deal on the Isle of Capri. This is where Tiberius later on had his like orgiastic murder center, the guy overseeing the murder of Jesus. These are the people who brought in Pontius Pilate to become buried in the the Sibelian Mountains in the Apennine Sibyls, in just below Nursia. That's the center of occultism, where you had global occult initiates and witches and witch covens do their pilgrimage to like Mecca. That's their Mecca, is to the Apennine Sibyl and Pontius Lakes, Pontius's lake at his funeral site in Italy, because that's where they see the person who was the hand of that which murdered Jesus, was buried. And so they built that whole thing around the that's where the Rosicrucians came out of, that took over England over the dead body of Thomas More, who again was a Platonist who wrote in Platonic dialogues, who was a follower of Cicero and Socrates. Plato, Thomas More, who got his head cut off when he was resisting turning England into an empire and having the king of Henry VIII, become his own lord of the church, his own godman, Sol Invictus. And he's like, no, don't do that. don't become your own head of your own church and fall into splintering religious wars. Don't. And he resisted, and he could have survived, just like Cicero or Socrates or Jesus. And I'm not trying to say that they're all the same. I'm just saying it's a similar principle.
Yeah.
And he was willing to die to defend the idea of the health of his true immortal soul, which is not his body. And the oligarchy despises when people like Martin Luther King Jr. or John F. Kennedy are able to tap into that source, and that they whine and they scream like children, and then they overthrow the chessboard, doing things like 9/11 to get their way, which involved, again, the murder of a lot of very innocent, good people who had to die for the sake of this oligarchy's dream of recapturing and reestablishing a global empire in light of what the Roman Empire was trying to do. So, yeah.
No, I mean, very, very important points you just made. It's a real quick. Let me draw a little through line here so people understand what we just discussed. Socrates, who we already talked about, his student is Plato. Plato writes Republic, which is the cave allegory that we began the show with. Plato's student is then Aristotle, right? And then Aristotle's student is then Alexander the Great. So just to connect like that thread.
One thing I would add, Aristotle was infused from the Peripatetic school into Plato's academy to subvert it from within by creating a pseudo Platonic philosophy. When Plato was a very old man, Aristotle was dishonest in my view, and Alexander.
I certainly prefer Plato over Aristotle. I will say that.
Oh yeah, Aristotle believed that slavery was built into the law of the universe, and that people are born slaves or born masters, and that he didn't believe. He was actually an anti-Platonist, and he was working to what's called the Delphic method, to mimic the surface appearance of a thing to destroy it from within. Kind of like what Charles Lyell or Darwin were deployed to do to destroy geological or biological science from within by modeling.
Infiltrate and destroy from within. How many times have we seen that happen in modern institutions, right? I mean, that's what the whole model is, right? So then you talk about the splintering of the Christian religion in Europe, which we won't get into we won't open that whole can of worms, but I mean, the 16th century really is defined in a lot of ways by like the 30 Years' War. Major battles, huge battles and wars fought over the idea of different interpretations of Christianity, or just the ability to practice your own version of it. Not only does that drive this conflict across Europe for decades, even centuries, it also drives people across the ocean to settle in America and colonize America. That's what really drove the impoverished people who became indentured servants to go get on the boats and go across and actually settle the land and form America. So you can understand that, like, that happened in Europe. There's no dispute that happened in Europe. And we also see that happen in Islam in the Middle East. Now it's a different dynamic and different history there. And we won't get into all of it, but what I talked about on Badlands Daily the other day, yesterday when I was on there, was I think we mentioned it before. We went into how the plan was for the Sunnis and the Shia to fight one another, to go to war with one another, and this is really where I think the intention was to subvert the Abraham Accords. Like they wanted to take what Trump was doing with the Abraham Accords, and they're like, oh, okay, this is a great idea. We will unite all of the Sunni, and we'll unite them against the Shia. And let me see if I have that. I'm pretty sure I have that map here. Right here. Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about this before, but you pretty much just draw a line straight through the Gulf, the Persian Gulf. You got Shia up here, you got Sunni down here. So the plan is, all right, we're going to unite all of these people down here with Israel and with America in the West, and then we're going to go to war with Iran, whoever they ally with. And then, in like you said, in Grand Chessboard, in Brzezinski's 1998 book, he describes the only thing that can really stop us is if Iran forms a triumvirate with Russia and China, which is exactly now what's happened. So what's really interesting is that none of that's going to happen now, by the way. That was the plan, I think, to create World War III, to kind of salvage what Donald Trump had ruined when he was president. And the reason it's not going to happen is because Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, made peace last November with Iran. Despite all of the negative things he said about Iran, and he's talked about how 1979 was a fulcrum, like a turning point in Middle Eastern history, and how it was basically used as a catalyst to radicalize both the cultures of Iran and the culture of Saudi Arabia to see who could be the most orthodox version of Islam. And it was like a race to see, oh, we're going to shut down our movie theaters. We're going to shut down our cafes. Women can't talk to men anymore. We're going to get as radical as we can. Who can be the most radical culture? And that was, of course, all driven by Western oligarchs and Western intelligence agencies. But now you're seeing a healing process occur. And this is all going to tie into 9/11, I promise. But you're seeing a healing process occur because, as I wrote about in the Badlands News Brief the other day, not only do you have peace forming between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is a big reason why I think Iran hasn't gone to war with Israel, is because Saudi's telling them not to, and so is Russia, and so is China. You also have Turkey forming their own, they're making peace now with Syria. They're making peace now with Saudi Arabia because they have not gotten along with Saudi Arabia. They also have made peace with Egypt because those who watched the show yesterday, I mentioned that in 2011, during the Arab Spring, which was the Muslim Brotherhood taking over the entire North Africa, they tried to overthrow all the governments of North Africa, the governments of the Middle East, all basically like in the same week. These color revolutions just organically happen. And you have Erdogan and Turkey and the Western media and all the usual suspects supporting it, saying this is democracy, even though it was the Muslim Brotherhood. And so Egypt, for 2 years, from 2011 to 2013, is taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood, and they have not been friendly towards Turkey ever since, for obvious reasons. And then Colonel Tanner Watkins, when she was on the show, she talked about how Turkey was a central hub for both NATO and Operation Gladio, which is what the Arab Spring was. That was just a massive that was a regional Operation Gladio operation. And so now, last week, you have Sisi, the Egyptian president. This is the guy who became president after they ran the counterinsurgency in 2013 against the Muslim Brotherhood. He now travels to Ankara, to Turkey, meets with Erdogan, and they bury the hatchet. And they're like, we're going to be friends again. So you see the entire Middle East now is now coalescing around this idea, which is peace. There's not going to be a war. They're not going to fight each other. They're done killing each other. They've been killing each other for thousands of years for reasons that precede Islam. I mean, they were doing this to each other. The tribal politics and all the subversive stuff was happening even before Islam was a thing. And Islam just became another catalyst for, another reason to do that stuff. But now they're done with that. And it doesn't mean that, there's never going to be conflict again and this is all going to be perfect. But in this moment in time, the fact that they're doing this, I think it's hard for me not to look at this and think this isn't like divine intervention or some sort of a greater plan, because in this moment in time, with everything else we've talked about, with all the nefarious things that are happening in the world and the unipolar hegemony trying to establish a one world central government, for them to be coming together, not as a caliphate, but as a multipolar a coalition of individual nations who respect one another's sovereignty and say, we're going to work together to stop this thing from destroying all of us. That requires incredible will and incredible courage on the part of every person involved.
And humility, right? I mean, like, because you could see that there are these multi-generational, centennial, if not millennial, traditions within various of these Muslim matrices that you've outlined, whether it's the Ottoman revivalist, the pan-Ottoman revivalist caliphate groupings that are there. They're a thing. Or you got the same thing in Egypt with certain romanticized visions of restoring the grandeur of ancient Egypt, or of Egypt in its grandeur as the dominant force. Or you got the same thing within Iran, within the idea there are active belief structures that presume that a new Persian empire under a Muslim sort of veneer could somehow be revived. Or you got the same thing in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Cooperation Council states, dominantly the Sunni states, that also believe that some sort of a caliphate can be restored with a hegemon as a manager of the jurisdiction of Central Asia and the Middle East. Those are active things that could all be used and have been used by the shadow masters to get Muslims to kill Muslims, to get Muslims to kill Christians, to get Christians to kill Muslims. You got the same thing within Christianity too, right? Similar bigoted, very, very hegemonically oriented persuasions within the Catholic tradition, within the Protestant tradition, within a variety of things. You got the same thing within Judaism. You got humility. You got factions that represent the idea that, and traditions that go back to the days of Rabbi Philo and the prophets, that no, if we're going to be the chosen people, well, that means we have to be the first. If we're the best, it means we have the moral obligation to be the best in morality, the best in love, the best in compassion. That's healthy. That's a healthy interpretation of trying to be the best. Then you got this perversion,
all based on Torah, by the way, the original scripture that was practiced by Jesus and his followers.
And I will also give like a little bit of leeway to the people who to Jews who might also read and like the Talmud. I've read things within the Talmud which are good. Okay. Like I'm down with that. You could, because people pick and choose what resonates with the health of their conscience and soul. And I agree. There's words of wisdom within the hundreds of different authors within the thing called the Talmud. And it's good whether you're whatever religious persuasion you are. Those are good words of wisdom on how to live and navigate through life. But then you got some toxicity. And I agree. A lot of moral Jews don't want to look at that. But it's a thing. There are authors who are bad people who wrote things which got caught up and are there in the Talmud. That's a thing too. And bad people will resonate to bad things, as inside, so as without. So we resonate to that which is like attracts like. And so they will latch onto those regressive things that reduce those who would wish to be followers of Judaism to become instruments for bad things. That happens. And just like we see the same thing with Christians.
I was going to say the same dynamic. I mean, you had the Council of Nicaea in 325. You had multiple events in Christianity after the life of Christ, after the Bible was written, where you had good ideas that were presented, good interpretations, and you had bad ideas that were presented and bad institutions. I mean, we talked earlier about the corruption of an institution, the corruption of a system. Look at the Vatican. I mean, look at what the Vatican became, right? So this stuff happens over and over and over again, no matter what religion, culture, persuasion you're talking about, because human beings are involved and human beings are deeply flawed creatures inherently. But that's also what makes them so magnificent, because when they choose to be moral and they choose to be righteous, that is a choice they're making, as opposed to the angels, as they're described in the Bible. They were forced to act that way, who are forced to worship God and forced to serve God. Humans are not forced to serve God. They choose to serve God. They choose to serve the morally righteous power in the universe. So that, I think, is the whole song of life, if you want to call it that. And really the struggle that we're in right now, because I do think that all this stuff is manifesting in a very literal, political, geopolitical way. And if we don't rise to the occasion and actually address it and seize the carpe diem, the moment to make this positive thing happen, then the other side is going to do it and they're going to win. And you're seeing the Muslims in the Middle East do the right thing. You're seeing them put aside their differences and come together and say, you know what, we don't agree on everything. We don't have to agree on everything right now. Like we have a common enemy. We have a common problem that we have to deal with. These people who want us to kill each other, and we have to rise above all that and not do it and work together to stop this thing, this blob, from destroying all of us. And are we in the West going to do the same thing, or are we going to succumb to it and kneel before it?
All right. I like you, Gordon. You're good. You're a good guy. You're okay. No, honestly, that was brilliant. I think that actually that would be a really great place to round out today's discussion. And it's just it makes me chuckle, because just like last week too, where we had all of our preset ideas of, okay, we're gonna go through 9/11, we're gonna go through the updates in the Middle East, we're gonna go through the regime change operations in South America, and then we don't do any of that because we just we're following the thread of the conversation. We're following where the conversation demands we follow it. It's organic, and I like that. I like that about this show.
We didn't plan anything out with this show or the last show. We just showed up and we're like, let's just start talking, and then it just goes where it goes.
Yeah, I think it's edifying. So let's do this. Let me read out the last ad for today's show, and while I'm doing that, if you notice anything that has been worth repeating in the comment section as questions or thoughts,
we'll do rants, and we will also do the boosts because they should be working today.
All right, cool. So let me just read out today's Badlands shop. Here we are. Have any plans after the show? How about heading over to the Badlands shop, where you will find Patriot companies with Patriot values? Put your money where your morals are and shop with peace of mind while supporting your favorite Badlanders. Whether you're shopping for everyday household items or a unique gift for that special someone, skip the big box store. Check out the Badlands shop and support Patriot businesses and Patriot media with every purchase. Find unique items for your home and garden. Stock up on food, kids' activities, pet supplies, and even plan for your financial future. You'll find just about everything, and we are adding more every day. Thank you for supporting companies that support Badlands. We couldn't do this without you. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/shop. I read it too fast. It's going to come, though. Here it is. It's coming. It's coming. Thank you. There it is. All right.
Awesome. Let's see. So we actually do have some rants going back.
Oh, yeah?
So, or some boosts going back.
Okay.
So we have, I see one on August 7th, but let me just make sure, because we haven't read boosts in a while because we're pre-recording shows and we were both on the road, and we agreed that we were going to, once we got live again, we would do it all together. So, all right. So it looks like we have August 7th. So we're going to go back to August 7th.
Ooh.
All right. August 8th. August 8th. Michelle, $50. Thank you so much. Ghost, I loved your interview with General Quast. Very professional and informative. Thank you so much. P.S. You looked very handsome. Thank you, Missy. I just sort of, for those who don't know, I put a button-up shirt and a jacket on, because I knew that General Quast was gonna be wearing a jacket as well. So I did it as well, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that. He didn't say anything to me, but I'm just saying, knowing that pushed me to dress my best. And we actually talked about that at the beginning of the interview. So if you haven't watched the interview, you can find it on the Badlands Rumble page under special events, special presentations. But thank you, Missy. I appreciate that. Brittany Lynn from August 15th, $50. I always look forward to watching Breaking History and learning from the brilliant minds of Gordon and Matt. This week's episode was an extra special treat with Cynthia joining the show. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and research. Yeah, that was an awesome show. Thank you, Brittany Lynn. That was from August 15th. I encourage people to go watch that. That was during Deadwood. So there's a lot going on that week, but we pre-recorded episode. Finally did the Jesuit dive, which we're going to revisit, of course, because it's a huge topic.
Oh yeah, we didn't do the dive. We did the Jesuit swim on the surface, and maybe we went down a little bit underwater. We held our breath for a few minutes, and then we came back up again. But no, we can do a dive. The dive is still waiting to happen.
Yes. Well said. Well said. All right, and then we have September 11th. Wait, I'm sorry. Stand by for processing. I need to figure out a better way to. I just want to make sure I don't miss anybody, because I'd feel terrible if I did. All right, so I had to double check that. All right, so we have one from September 11th. Godwin 73, great name. $15. Gents, love the show. Ghost, great to meet you at GART. Last show, and Hitler saying the slaves shall serve. For what it's worth, that was also a famous saying of Aleister Crowley's. Still working on when he first said it, but it was a repeated phrase. Thanks. Awesome intel. Thank you for sharing that. That's what I love about our audience, is our audience often will come into the boosts and teach us something and present their own information. So I encourage anybody to please do that. Thank you, God wins. And then let's do the rants. Let's see what rants we got. All right. Karamaga, $10. Love this show. It helps me make sense of what's going on in this world. Well, thank you for that. It's always good to get to hear that it's helping people. And yeah, a lot of people, as I told you before, Matt, at GART said the same thing. I'm glad people appreciate what we do here, because every episode's different. We don't necessarily plan it all out. We pick a topic and we kind of come with our own information and compare, like y'all watch us just kind of compare notes live. Sometimes we go deep into current events and what's actually happening in terms of the news cycle and the narrative being told. And sometimes we go on more esoteric, kind of general philosophical adventures through the mind, like we did today. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that people appreciate both versions of that and everything in between. And yeah, I really enjoyed doing the show. So awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you all for watching. Matt, any closing thoughts?
No, I really appreciated those remarks from the audience, and I look forward to more of these things. So, I mean, I love hearing feedback from the audience. I really do. And questions, especially, it really is good kindling for the fires of creativity. So, for next week, anybody who has something that's just sort of beating, let's try to get out of their hearts and into words, just try it out. Write your thoughts down, use a notebook as well. Like I found for myself, my own mental development has been assisted greatly by a decision I made many years ago to journal my thoughts as much as possible. And even when I don't want to, do it anyway. That involves memories, recollections, things you read, things you experienced, and try to recapitulate those thoughts you had in the course of your day with friends, discussions you had that were interesting, jokes that you were told that caused you to laugh, or things that you read or things that you experienced in a video or a documentary or an interview that you consumed that you want to internalize. The way to really digest it and make those roots of knowledge grow is to turn it into words of your own. And the idea of journaling from that vantage point, not to just remember what I did, but really to have a dialogue with yourself, the way Plato encouraged within his Theaetetus dialogue, within the Alcibiades, within the Gorgias, within so many dialogues. Develop that and do that in the context, I would say as well, if people can, read the Apology, the Apology, but when the Demos, the Democratic Party, found Socrates guilty of corrupting the minds of the youth, that was written down in the form of dialogue sort of almost like a monologue. But Plato had written down and transcribed to the best of his abilities what his teacher Socrates had said in his own defense. And Xenophon did his own variation, who was also there in the audience witnessing the proceedings. And it's worth just watching that, reading that, actively reading that, thinking about what you're reading within the context of the life of the man as a man who is just like us, a flawed human being trying to figure things out, being the best that he could be. abiding by his conscience. That's what Socrates and Plato were. So do that, and really you'll find that your power, as you do that, also keeping in mind things like what we were saying today about the Republic. It's part of a trilogy of which the Critias is a part, of which the Laws by Plato is another part. The Timaeus, which is sort of the foundational scientific document that gave rise to so many creative discoveries in opposition to those Rosicrucian and Neoplatonic Hermeticists who have tried to subvert and undermine the natural law creative discovery process of great human beings. They've created this opposing current of fake science, illustrated more recently by the figures of people like Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac Newton the Rosicrucian, or Sir Charles Lyell, or Sir Charles Darwin, or Dawkins, or, there's a fake current of science that we're told is all science is, and it's not that. It's so much richer and more beautiful. And there's this opposing, more beautiful thing that actually makes discoveries that's rooted in what Plato does in his Timaeus dialogue, which is part of the trilogy of which the Republic is a part of, that we were talking about today. Or that when you look at things like the Apology, that dialogue is part of a series of there's something that happens the day later in the Crito dialogue, where Crito, his friend, is trying to convince him, look, I've bribed your guards. I'm a rich guy. You can get out and live a long, happy life in, Italy. Just, you won't have to die. I've bribed them. They're all good. They're okay with it. And there's a dialogue where Socrates is like, well, is that the best possible choice that I could make right now within the context of the broader scheme of history that I've chosen to live my life and devote myself to as an anti-imperial figure? And he uses reason to deem that it is actually better to live out the sentence and die. And the same thing in the Phaedo dialogue on the question of the immortality of the soul, the day that he drinks the hemlock and he ultimately physically dies, but he demonstrates before he does so with all of his disciples that you have no reason to be sad or mournful of me, that you can know that you all have a soul just like I do, and that the soul is participating in God's divine spark, because we can discover laws of God's mind and creation, and because we can discover the eternal within creation, we must have something similar by virtue of said knowledge within ourselves as individuals that is also beyond decay, beyond boundedness of space and time. That is similar to the thing that we discover when we go from a state of ignorance to a state of eureka, of knowledge, of something of like, a true discovery, not just memorization, but a true discovery. And he gives some examples. So these are sort of ways to build the mental moral muscles, especially at this time of crisis when it is so important that we be not mentally sloppy. There are so many fallacious, there's something called sophistry. For people watching who don't know, sophistry is the misuse of logic to make the false appear true. It also involves a subcategory called the art of rhetoric. It's an art of speech, the art of persuasion.
Yep.
It doesn't.
I studied rhetoric, and I was a rhetoric minor in college.
Did you do well?
Yeah.
Me too.
It was by accident. I was a history major, and then they're like, "Oh, you're already taking these public speaking and writing classes. If you take a few more, you'll get a rhetoric minor." And I was like, "Okay." So I just,
something fucked up when I was in ethics class in university. The teacher had everybody pick subjects from like a hat, and it's like whatever you picked, you had to like defend or oppose, irregardless of how you actually felt as a person. So I got
same thing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I won over the class at the time to communism, and I was like, I don't know. I never read a single thing by Marx, and my job was to like defend communism. And I did like a few little Google searches the night before, and I was like, okay, I could play with this, and just like using the art of like playing the audience, feeding their egos, like
manipulating them.
Yeah,
and you saw that on display last night with Kamala Harris, like that.
Totally.
Yeah. Which we'll do a full analysis of that next time, because I agree. I think we have reached a good stopping point. But yeah, I mean that's really what it was last night. And they were trying to get Trump upset, and they were trying to get him off. They're trying to get him off kilter and get him to lose control and humiliate himself. And he did a good job of restraining himself from falling for all those traps.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think Trump did it well. I think he could have done better. He missed some opportunities, if you ask me, to
People
like
say that.
introduce
People
the
said that.
policies of his Agenda 47. Wait a minute, 47? Is that it? I just
Yeah,
brain
yeah,
farted.
yeah. I think he's a genius. But what he did rip apart Project 25. He was like, I've never
That's
read
good.
it, and he's like, I will never read it. I got a principle now. I'm never gonna read it.
That's good that he did that.
Yes.
However, like I said, I feel like he could have like elevated it more to infuse the policies he's been fighting for. He knows what those policies are. He could. I feel like he was
said
less
that.
than he could have been.
You're not the first person to make that analysis, but yeah, fair enough.
And as far as people who are asking, like, there's a couple of people who want to reread the Republic. I would read the Rouse translation. Stay away from the Jowett. Jowett is an Oxford roundtable Malthusian, dishonest He hates Plato. But if you Google Plato, 90% of the translations you will find online, I'm telling this to the audience, are by Jowett. Screw Jowett. He hates Plato. He's anti-Plato. He's living to destroy Plato from within. Read the Rouse version of the Republic. It's better. Stay away from Taylor. Taylor is also trying to revive the Eleusinian mysteries and the Neoplatonic Julian the Apostate traditions.
Can you spell Rouse for everybody so they know?
R-O-U-S. I forgot now, but
R-U-S. Okay. Well, Rouse is what you're looking for. I think it's R-O-U-S-E if I'm not mistaken. But
yeah. So use those, and again, keep in mind irony. I would involve if people have never read Plato before, because for me this is I've read everything by Plato. Most things I've read from Plato multiple times, including the Republic. I would say the Republic, as rewarding as it is, it's the most irony rich, and it's full of, he's intentionally putting deceitful things into it to misguide you so that you become more aware of how you're sloppy in your self-analysis of your axioms. That's what he's consciously doing. Now,
think of the way satire works in the modern age, like satire, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Read the Apology, read the Credo, read the Phaedo, read the Gorgias, read the Philebus on the nature of how to judge good and evil. Do those first, get a sense of who Plato is as a personality, because it comes through. And then I would say read the Rouse translation of the Republic, maybe then translate into the Laws. And then look at how all of this method that he's encouraging is affecting your own method, your own power of self-examination of your heart and your axioms to make discoveries, and look for where it occurs in people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Thomas More or Cicero or St. Augustine or Eusebius or Philo of Alexandria. Look at the people who really battled the oligarchy and upshifted humankind's potential to the Benjamin Franklin. You'll find that the true Platonists who are utilizing and internalizing his method are the ones who have been moving history in a better way, in opposition to the death cult that wants to bring us into a closed cage of forever stasis and depopulation and stupidity. It's like that gets you closer to this principled dynamic shaping all of universal history, even before there was Plato. And we're going back to Solon, and before Solon, maybe Akhenaten's advisors. So it's like, it's universal. Human beings as a divine creature made in the image of a divine, immortal, beautiful, good, reasonable creator, or humankind made in the image of mud or some like evil demiurge wanting to, make the world evil in his own image. It's like very different views.
Yeah. But believe it or not, the ancient Greeks, before there was a Rome, or a Rome as we have come to know it, the ancient Greeks actually were dealing with a lot of the similar dynamics that we're dealing with today as they developed this thing called democracy. So, all
right, awesome. Cool. Well, that was good. Like I said, totally unexpected.
Yep.
Totally organic and really good. I hope people enjoyed this, and tune in next week. We're going to pick up a thread and maybe deal with some of the things we haven't touched on last week or this week pertaining to world events. We'll see, or not. Maybe we'll be spontaneously improvisational once more. Who knows? But hopefully you enjoy it. So till next week, everybody. Until next week, Gordon. Thank you.
See you, Matt.